5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yeah, here we go. This is it. This is Jacob Clifford. You've been watching my videos for several days now. I'm super excited to get you guys ready. Today is the day. The big AP Macro exam in about 3 hours. You're ready. At least I hope you're ready. I made this short video. We're not going to be here very long to give you some tips and strategies here on test day. This is it. Now, many of you are seniors. I know it's been rough, particularly with, let me turn my audio here off, with this, you didn't have prom and you didn't have other things going on in your life because of COVID-19. I'm sorry, but you can make the best out of it with rocking your AP test. Nobody can take that away from you, right? And no one can take away the fact that you had a very unique senior year experience. Now, that said, we're going to jump straight into things. Before I jump into the actual test preparation stuff, keep in mind, economics is not just preparing you for like a test. Yes, you're taking a test today, and that's important, but really economics makes you a better decision maker. Thinking like an economist will make your life better. It'll help you with everything you do in your entire life. So even if you don't pass the AP test, still take college classes in economics, still understand economics because it's going to help you through your entire life. Now, that said, let me go really quickly. I'm going to show you some free responses. Obviously, today's about free responses. Every single one of you is going to get probably different free responses, right? So they'll probably end up being 8 different versions. So, you might get something completely different than your friend because obviously the AP test people are trying to avoid students cheating. But let me show you a few free responses. I think you're going to see the same sort of free responses. So I'm going to show you this and I'll answer some of your questions. But before I do that, thank you so much for watching my videos. It means the world to me. If you haven't already subscribed, do so now. I know you're not going to watch these videos for the rest of your life, but I'm so close to 500,000 subscribers, so you can hook me up. So let me jump straight into it. Here we go. But like I said, thank you. Seriously, thank you so much. Let's get up and running. Okay. So the first type of free response you might see is a free response like this, which is utility maximizing. Now, I know you've seen these before. I'm not going to go over the free response, but I'm going to give you some tips, right? That's what we're going to do. Remember, they can either give you the total benefit like they did in this question, or they can start off by giving you the marginal benefit. So either one, gives you the right answers for the question, but you have to convert the total to the marginal. So if this is total, you'd write it in a new column, calculate the marginal benefit. Remember, marginal is the change in something. It's the change, in this case, total benefit divided by the change in quantity. Now notice, for most of these questions, the quantity always goes up by 1. So, from 30 to 4 units, the total benefit goes from 36 to 40. So the marginal would be $4 of benefit. And you understand that concept, but I'm not saying they'll do it this year, but they potentially could, have this go up by 2s. And so you'd have to divide it by 2. Again, that's the idea of calculating marginal. You'll have to do marginal somewhere in this test in 3 hours, I promise you. But understand this idea of how to calculate margin utility from total utility. And then you divide this by the price. And they always give you the price of X, the price of Y, and you keep comparing them until you run out of money. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about and you've never seen these, you still have a little bit of time. I made about a 5-minute video or so about utility maximizing, so you can watch that video if you want to. But this is the sort of question you might see from Unit 1. They're going to ask you questions like, what's the marginal benefit of the third unit of X? That's like the easy question. This year, they're probably not going to ask them just that simple. They'll probably say, okay, explain how you got your answer, right? And so you'd say, third unit of X, it went from 28 to 36. And so that is an increase of $8 of benefit. And then you'd explain why. Marginal benefit is the change in total benefit divided by the change in quantity. And then you'd say it went from 28 to 36. You'd explain that concept. So this year I expect a lot of explain questions to happen. So you see a question like that. The other kind of question you would see is like on this one where they ask you to calculate maybe the total benefit of some amount. So if there was 2 X's and 1 Y, how much total benefit do you get? And it's easy, it's given, right? It's 28 plus the 10 for 38 total. Again, hopefully I'm not going too fast here. I'm just reminding you what you might see on this kind of free response. The biggest thing you'll see is the idea of combination. So what combination will maximize total utility? And again, you calculate margin utility per dollar, and then you keep buying them until you run out of money. They'll say, okay, you have $35 and keep spending until you run out of money. And this is the utility maximizing rule. which you've seen before, the utility maximizing rule. So that's the kind of question you might see from Unit 1. This is from 2016. If you want to, if you have the time, you can maybe go and take a look at this free response. Don't sit down and do it necessarily right at this moment, but just look over it really quick and see, okay, yeah, I know how to do that. And maybe if you see something like down here where it asks you to do some calculation questions, you're like, wait, I don't know how to calculate this. So maybe go look that up. But that's something you might see from Unit 1. Okay, do me a favor right now, inside the chat, in the comments, let me know how you would feel. If this was a question, let's just say it was out of 5, would you get 5 out of 5, 1 out of 5, 2 out of 5, if you see a question similar to this about utility maximizing? Let me know right now in the chat. Again, if you're like 4, if you're 3, 4, or 5 out of 5, you're fine. You're okay. If you've never seen this before, then at the very least, either have my video, watch my video really quickly, or, you take a look at this free response, and so it gives you some idea of how to do this. Yeah, you guys are giving me your... Okay, so that's the one thing you might see. Again, utility maximizing. Here is what I think you're going to see. The way the AP test works is it's hard to write questions, particularly without, giving students a graph. So it's very unlikely. I don't think you're going to have although you could, draw they can't ask you to draw this year. They're not going to ask you. So they could say, describe what'll happen if there's a decrease in the price of a substitute to the demand and supply for another product. So you should just know the basic shifters. Remember, and I know you already know this, but demand increases, like it increases to the right, decreases to the left. For supply, increases the right. You get the idea. Remember double shifts? So here's a tip for double shifts rule: when two things shift at the same time. If demand were to go up and supply were also to go up, right? Then right now, let me know in the comments what happens. Remember, price or quantity, one of them is indeterminate. You can't tell. So if demand goes up and supply shifts right, which is goes up, price would be indeterminate, quantity would go up. So that's something they could ask you this year. They could ask you general questions about supply and demand. Like I said, change in the price of resources affecting supply, change in customers and consumers affecting demand. Just understand supply and demand shifts. They probably also ask you a question very similar to this one, where they give you something like this with like a price ceiling and a price floor. Tip, write it down. Make sure you remember, a ceiling has to go below equilibrium. A floor has to go above if it's binding. So if they ask you, if they've done this in the past, they say, okay, there's a floor that's down here at $2. What's going to happen to the price and quantity? Nothing. Price and quantity stay exactly the same because a floor can't go below equilibrium. It has no effect, right? If you say, okay, price can't fall below 2 and the price is 5, well, it's not falling below 2. This law has no effect. It is not binding. So you might see general supply and demand shifts. You might see double shifts. You might see ceilings and floors. You also are going to see probably consumer and producer surplus, calculating consumer surplus at different scenarios. In this case, at equilibrium, you would calculate consumer surplus. Remember, it's 1/2 base times the height. So this triangle right here would be consumer surplus at the equilibrium price of 5. Make sure you can actually do those calculations and feel comfortable with that. And then, of course, depending on what they give you, they can ask you all sorts of questions of what happened to consumer surplus, or where is deadweight loss? How do you calculate deadweight loss? All those things could be asked in this year's free response, and they will be. I guarantee some of you will have some sort of question that has a supply and demand graph, and as you're calculating consumer and producer surplus and potentially deadweight loss. Other things you might see: so regular demand shifts, double shifts, consumer surplus, producer surplus, ceilings and floors. You also might see a tax, or like this particular question was a world price, where the price is down here. And we have trade, so this is the quantity domestically produced, and this is the quantity that we're actually consuming. So this is the amount that we're importing from other countries. Again, if you haven't seen this, that's okay. It's okay. It's don't freak out. That I don't think that's what it's going to be this year. They could ask you that. What I think it's more likely to be is elasticity. Yes, elasticity. You've got to know elasticity. They can say if price falls from 5 to 4. Then what is the elasticity of demand coefficient? Please remember the elasticity of demand coefficient. First of all, remember the equation. This is the percent, I'll write it down here. This is the percent change in quantity divided by the percent change in price. That's how you get the elasticity coefficient. It's the same for demand and supply, right? So it's the same exact equation. But just understand, for demand, demand is always negative, right? Because demand's a downward sloping curve. So it's going to be negative automatically. So don't miss out and not put the sign and lose that point. Because if price goes down, quantity goes up. So this one would be a positive number, this would be a negative number, that's going to be negative, no doubt about demand. So for that, so they might ask you to calculate elasticity. Remember, elasticity is the percent change. It is not just the raw change. So it's not, 1 and 2, it's the percent change. 5 down to 4 is a decrease of 20%, right? This is a negative 20%. And 8 up to 10 would be an increase of 25%. You have those equations, right? So it's not like this is super hard stuff. In this case, quantity is bigger than that change in price. So this would be elastic demand. So elastic demand, and that's what you need to know is remember this whole thing I showed you before, kind of this is 0, this is 1, in between 0 and 1 and greater than 1. This right here is perfectly in the elastic, the elasticity coefficient. This number pops out perfectly elastic. Right here, this whole range, anything less than 1 is relatively inelastic. 1, what is it going to be? Unit elastic. And then anywhere greater than 1 is going to be relatively elastic. Again, this is all using the elasticity coefficient. Now, there's another way of finding elasticity, and they might ask you that. Let me know in the chat right now if you know exactly what that other way is, for demand at least. What is another way of finding the elasticity between this point right here, between $5 and $4 right there? So let me know if you don't know, that's okay, but you should know the other way. And most students think it's actually easier to do it that way. But yeah, so what's the other way? Do you know? It's the total revenue test. The total revenue test is another way of calculating, oh, you can't see that. Total revenue test is another way of finding elasticity of demand. You calculate the total revenue, price times the quantity at some spot here, right? So 5 times 8, that's going to be, what is that, 40? No, it's not. It is, what's 5 times 8? Alexa, what's 5 times 8? My brain's fried because I'm not worried about that.
5 times 8 is 40.
Okay. Now, so in this is an interesting question here. Take a look at this one. So 40, and then over here it went to 40. So if you use, and this is weird because this is just a weird question, if you used the total revenue test, then the demand here would be unit elastic. And if you use the elasticity coefficient, the demand would be elastic. So they won't write a question like that. So I probably should have done those calculations before so you weren't freaked out. Don't freak out, don't freak out. You know this. Just understand the idea of percent change in quantity, percent change in price, elasticity demand coefficient. Other things you need to remember for that is remember for cross price, positive is a substitute, negative is a complement. And for income elasticity, positive is a normal good. Can you see that? And negative is an inferior good. Okay? Again, this is all coming over this whole idea of elasticity. I think what you're going to get is a graph similar to this. They're going to ask you about elasticity. They're going to ask you about ceilings and floors. They're going to ask you about double shifts and that stuff. Or they could ask you about this right here. Yes, a tax, an excise tax where the price was here and then the price is now here. They can ask you consumer surplus before and after the tax, or they can ask you the box of tax revenue. So understand this is the price here. Let me zoom in for you. This is a market with a tax. This is the price that consumers pay, but producers don't get to keep that. You got to go down the old supply curve and over. This is the net price for the sellers. That's what they actually receive. So people paid $6, but the sellers only get to keep $4 because there's a $2 tax. And that's one of the tricks you got to watch out for. Remember, a $2 tax because the vertical distance between the supply curve from 2 to 4, from 4 to 6, 5 up to 7. That's the whole idea, is this idea of a per unit tax, shifting the supply to the left or increasing the marginal cost curve. So this is something you might see. Keep in mind, you'll have to be able to spot the tax revenue potentially, And again, they could easily make you do some elasticity questions for this one, where you'd calculate the total revenue here and then the total revenue here as a possibility, or calculate the percent change. So you might see a tax question. It looks something like this. The one thing I haven't talked about is, of course, dead weight loss. You have to feel extremely comfortable with this idea, I'll just shade it in, of dead weight loss, which would occur if there's a ceiling or a floor, or if, with a monopoly. I mean, no dead weight loss. So examples we said earlier, this is from the cheat sheet, with a price ceiling, there's your dead weight loss, right? We're producing less output. So you might have to calculate these, right? I don't think you'll just have to spot them. You have to be able to calculate them. So just understand that concept and feel comfortable with the idea of taxes. So again, with taxes, here's what it looks like, right? So you got the dead weight loss, consumer surplus, producer surplus, and the tax revenue box. They could also ask you who's paying more of that tax. I made an excise tax video, so if you're like, what's going on? I don't know this stuff. Take a look at that video. Again, it's only 5 minutes long to help you remind you that. Again, I'm going pretty quick here, and I know that I am. I just want to give you some tips and strategies. Here's the recap. Number one, I think they might ask you, and they're going to ask some of you guys a utility maximizing question. So make sure you're ready with that. They're going to ask you regular demand, supply, consumer, producer surplus, elasticity questions. They might ask you a tax question. The next thing they might ask you is, notice, no graph. They might ask you just about perfect competition. And they might ask you all those questions that you need to know about perfect competition. So describe a perfectly competitive firm's demand curve and explain why it's the shape that it is. Remember, perfect competition, notice they're not going to ask you to draw it, but they could ask you to explain what the firm's demand curve looks like. It's horizontal, Mr. DARP, which looks like this, and you explain why, because they are price takers. They take the price set by the market. So that's something they could ask you this year. I don't think they're going to ask you too many questions about perfect competition, partially because it would get hard to explain it. You know what I'm saying? They couldn't ask you, well, what would the ATC do? What would the marginal cost do? They could ask you if it's making profit, describe at the profit maximizing quantity the relationship between the price and the ATC, and you understand the idea. At the profit maximizing quantity, which is here, MR equals MC, the price is above the ATC, they're making profit. So I think if you understand how to draw the graph, you understand the idea of the questions they might ask. The one thing you will definitely see if you see perfect competition is something about enter and exiting the market. So if you see a graph like this, they give it to you and they say, what's going to happen in the long run? You'd say, well, profit would disappear. There'd be no economic profit, but there would be accounting profit. Remember, in the long run, firms will enter, the demand will go down, right? And it'll fall until it goes right to here. So it's going to end up looking at the end like this. Demand, marginal revenue. And so in the end, they'll be, and this is why I'm showing it to you, there's going to be no economic profit, but they will be making accounting profit. So watch out for that. Also, watch out for the idea of efficiency. This has both types of efficiency, productive and allocative, right? They're producing the amount that society wants. Remember, productive is at minimum ATC. Allocative is producing where the price equals the marginal cost, where there will be no deadweight loss. Again, that's socially optimal or allocative efficiency. Again, I don't think you're not going to have to draw it, but they could ask you to describe it. What would happen in the long run? Remember, the reason why price fell is because firms entered because there's low or no barriers to entry in perfect competition. So you might see a question when they're describing perfect competition to you, but I don't think that's what it's going to be for most of you. For most of you, I think it's going to be right here, a monopoly. That's what I think you're going to be asked. But before we do that, they might ask you a question like this, because this is very easy to ask students, and they can potentially give everybody the same for response, just change up the numbers a little bit, and that would require students to actually fully explain their calculation. This is the idea of profit maximizing. It's exactly the same thing as this, except it's in chart form. And so you'd have to calculate the marginal costs, then you'd have to calculate, they give you the marginal revenue, and then you'd figure out how many units should you produce to maximize profit. Remember, the key rule in all of microeconomics is a profit maximizing rule. You produce where the MR hits the MC without the MC going over. So that concept they might ask you to do in this form. This is from the 2006 AP exam in case you want to take a look at it. They could ask you, look at some of these questions. I can do them real quick for you. How much are the fixed costs? Fixed costs are 20 because when you produce nothing, there's a cost. So fixed cost. They might ask you, like I said, some cost questions, like how do you calculate ATC, ABC? Calculate the marginal cost of producing the first unit. First unit costs $7 additional. For this year, this wouldn't be the answer. They'd include the word explain. So make sure when you see the word explain, you fully explain that out. The reason how I got that is the change in total cost divided by the change in quantity. Change in total cost, it went from 20 to 27, so that's a change of 7, and quantity changed from 0 to 1, so the marginal cost is 7. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, they could ask you about the ATC or the AVC at any one of these quantities, so feel comfortable doing those. You already have the equations in your book or on my cheat sheet for all those, so the equations won't be hard as long as you understand how to use them. And then the most important thing is this idea of maximizing profit, calculating the marginal cost, identifying, okay, should I produce the second? Okay, I should. Okay, how about the third? How about the fourth? And then calculating profit. If you haven't done so, maybe you have a little bit of time. If you feel this is really difficult for you, look at my Unit 3 practice sheet. That's going to help you practice this concept and the graph idea for perfect competition. So I cover both perfect competition graph and perfect competition chart in that practice sheet. So I think that's where you're going to be asked questions. Watch out, like I said, for fixed costs, understanding when you produce nothing, you're still going to have some sort of cost, so it's your fixed cost. And be careful. Big thing you have to be careful about is, are they asking for total cost or average cost? So if they said, what's the total cost, or what's the, for example, watch this question. Here's the thing we got to watch out for. If you saw a question like, okay, for the third unit, how much is the variable cost? Right? So the variable cost of the third unit. So that would be different than what's the average variable cost of the third unit. So the variable cost, well, there's 53 is the total, minus that 20 of fixed, that leaves 33. This would be $33 of variable cost, which would be the right answer. But if they asked you what's the average variable cost, then you'd have to divide that by 3 to get 11. So it's just a question of reading the question, very carefully and look what they're asking for. Are they asking for average cost, average variable cost? Something else you got to watch out for, and you know this, is the idea that there is a shutdown point. That shutdown point is not at ATC. That shutdown point is at AVC. So right here, this is the shutdown point. If the price ever falls below that, you should produce nothing. The MR equal MC rule doesn't apply if price falls below AVC. So understand that, and also understand that this part of the marginal cost curve is the short run supply curve. That is a short run supply curve. So, I'll show it to you a little easier to see it this way instead of my ugly graphs. So right there, this red line, which is the marginal cost, is the short run supply curve, and the shutdown point is that AVC right there. So I think you might see a question about, calculating things with the chart, but you're probably most likely going to see a monopoly. They've asked monopolies every year for years and years and years. They could ask you so much different things. I think the one you'd get wouldn't look like this. I think the one that you'd get would actually have numbers. This has P5, P4, all that stuff. I think you'll end up having numbers in all these, so they can ask you questions like, where's consumer surplus? Right? They can ask you, of course, price and quantity. They can ask you price and quantity, different versions of that. So where's the price and quantity profit maximizing? Where's price and quantity socially optimal, which is right here, right? That's where, there's no deadweight loss here. They can ask you, deadweight loss. Where's the area of deadweight loss? Calculate that area of deadweight loss. They could ask you questions about where total revenue is maximized, or the elastic inelastic range. Remember, total revenue is maximized right there where the the marginal revenue hits 0. So total revenue is maximized here, where profit is maximized here. Profit maximized. And those are two different ideas, right? MR equals MC, profit. Remember, the price is not P1. Be careful with that. Go up to the demand curve. So price would be P5. This would be profit maximizing. This would be total revenue maximizing, different idea. This right here is socially optimal. There'd be no deadweight loss whatsoever. And they can ask you, like I said, all sorts of questions for this one. Total revenue, like I said, maximizing. They can ask you the box of profit. I mean, if they had numbers here, you could actually calculate at unregulated the box of profit, which would be right here. They don't have it set up for this one, but make sure they could ask you questions like, what is the profit? What is the total revenue? What's the total cost? All from this one graph. They could ask you, like I said, elastic and inelastic range. Remember, this is the elastic range and inelastic range. It's alphabetical. That helps you out. It has to do with the total revenue test. So there it is. If that makes sense, hopefully you feel comfortable with that concept. I probably should have asked you the whole time to keep letting me know, how you would do with these. Let me know right now, 5 out of 5, if you see Monopoly just like this, how would you actually end up doing? Would you feel really comfortable with this? The kind of questions they're going to ask, this fear response would be not hard to convert to this COVID-19 version, especially if they asked you explain. So they said, calculate the profit, explain how you got your answer, and you'd fully explain, or explain the elastic and the inelastic range of the demand curve. All those are in my 50 essential questions, the ultimate review packet for those of you who have that. But they're also in your book if you want to use your book as well. So let me know, 5 out of 5, people feel comfortable with that. The last thing that I think it would be, and you know exactly what I'm about to show you right here. What do you think it could be? Well, not Monopoly. It could ask Monopoly's competition, but probably not. And if it was, by the way, Monopoly's competition, and the ATC went down here, you know what I'm talking about, it would be the same sort of questions. Price and quantity, consumer surplus, deadweight loss, total revenue maximizing. So Monopoly's competition ends up having the very similar things to Monopoly, just firms can enter in the long run. The last thing, right now, let me know in the chat, what do you think is the last thing they might be asking you on this AP test coming up in 2.5 hours? Yes, it is, woo, game theory, good old game theory. They could ask you a question where obviously you have a payoff matrix, they give you a whole scenario, and then they start asking you some questions on this. Usually it's broken down to 3 different parts. First part is, can you read the chart? So if Roadway goes early and Rankin goes early, how much profit will Roadway earn? That's the kind of question you would see, and that the answer would be 1,000, right? So understand, the trick I give my students is, I circle Roadway, then I circle all the numbers on the left, and all the numbers on the left, those are all Roadway. That's what I'm watching out for. So the first question is, can you just read the chart? Second question is this idea of a dominant strategy. Dominant strategy is, that move you should make regardless what the other person does. And so the trick to this, for dominant strategy, let the other person move, what would you choose? And then let the person do the other move, what would you choose? And if you end up choosing the same thing, no matter what, if whatever they do, then you have a dominant strategy. Remember, in this case, it's either going to be early, late, or no dominant strategy. So let me actually do it for this one. What I have my students do, let Rankin make the move. So Rankin decides to go early. So I will cover up this as an option. This is not even an option because we're not even talking about Rankin going late. And so Roadway can choose between getting $1,000 or $750. They're obviously going to want $1,000. Put a star next to that one. Okay, if Rankin decides to go late, Roadway can choose to have $950, which is better than $700. If you notice, Roadway will always go early because their stars align. This is their dominant strategy. That's a dominant strategy for Roadway. Okay, dominant strategy, stars align. Let's do the same thing. Now, if Roadway decides to go early, cover these up because that's not an option. Rankin get 900 or 850, rather have 900. And if you can still see that, 650, 800, oh, rather go 800. Notice these stars do not align, right? Sometimes Rankin goes early, sometimes late, and so no dominant strategy. I know many of you guys feel really comfortable with this, which is awesome. I'm just trying to show you that last step. And what's that last step? It is my phone going off. That's not what the last step was. The last step is right here. If the stars end up in the same box together, that is Nash equilibrium. There is no incentive for either one of these firms to deviate from this. This is not, notice, it might not be the highest numbers for both of them. Some students like to say, oh, just pick the highest numbers. That must be Nash equilibrium. No. That's not the idea. This is the idea of that there's no reason for Roadway to go late, right? And there's no reason for Rankin to go late. There's no reason to deviate from where they're going to end up. That's called Nash equilibrium right there. So they're going to ask you about 3 things. 1, read the chart. 2, dominant strategy. 3, where's Nash equilibrium? Like last year, there can be 2 Nash equilibria where there's 2 areas have stars. So if there's stars here, and stars here, stars there, then you get the idea that there actually can be 2 in that case. Now, that said, that's the majority of what these fear responses are going to be on. I can answer some of your questions if you'd like. One of the things that you have to feel extremely comfortable with also that I haven't spent any time with is the idea of Unit 5 in the resource market right here, hiring firms. So this is in Unit 5. It's a very short unit, but just understand the idea that when a perfectly competitive firm is hiring workers in the labor market, this perfect competitive labor market, the supply is horizontal. Right? Again, this graph's not going to help you unless you understand it. This is wage taker. Wage is set by the market, and then each worker generates less and less additional revenue. Right? So each worker adds less and less output, and therefore less and less revenue. This is the graph form. You should also feel comfortable with the chart form. The chart form would look something similar, but not exactly the same as this. It would have the quantity of workers, and then it would have the output they produce, and you'd have to hire workers. I don't think it's going to be Unit 5 stuff, only because the College Board knows that they don't want to give you too many questions from units that you weren't even in class for. So there might be like one question where they'll ask you something like, okay, here's perfect competition in the product market. Stay with me here. Here's the product market. This is selling apples, right? And over here is hiring workers to pick those apples, right? So they could ask you a question as they're talking about this concept. Okay, well, what if this is a labor market? Describe the supply curve and explain why it's the shape that it is. Those are the kind of questions you might actually see in that. The only last thing I need to show you, because I'm sure some of you guys are interested, is the idea of like price discrimination. They might ask you not to draw the graph, but understand the idea of perfect price discrimination where the demand becomes the marginal revenue. So for every single unit, they're charging the price that people are willing to pay. They might ask you about that, probably not this year. One thing I want to point out, 2 things for this. There is no consumer surplus and no deadweight loss for this, right? Consumer surplus all becomes profit, and there's no deadweight loss because they're producing the amount society wants. They are producing the allocatively efficient quantity. Last concept, and again, I'm way out here in the weeds, is the idea of a monopsony. You've got the graph if you need it. You've got your textbook and online if you need it. But understand what a monopsony is. It's a monopoly for labor. I don't think it's going to be on that. In fact, here's my predictions for you guys on what I think it's going to be. I've already kind of mentioned a few of them. You're going to see in the next 2.5 hours, you're going to see supply and demand. They're going to ask you, what's going to happen with this general shift on supply and demand. Explain what happens and then why it happens. So make sure you can do that. You're going to see a question on elasticity, how to calculating the elasticity coefficient. Remember, demand is always negative, always, no matter what. And then identifying if something is elastic or inelastic. You might see that as well. I think you're definitely going to see, either ceilings, different types of regulations, ceilings, floor, subsidies or taxes, some sort of government involvement inside a market. That's going to be in there. Some of you are going to see game theory, let's be honest. Some of you just by luck, or maybe not, if you don't like game theory, will have a game theory matrix. If you have perfect competition, it's probably not going to be the graph as much as it's going to be explaining. And then, of course, like I said, you're going to see a monopoly as well. Hopefully this was helpful for you guys. I don't want to spend too much time with this. I just wanted to, the reason why I made this video is one, to say good luck. And more importantly, with everything I just covered, if there's anything you do not know and you've never seen or you feel very uncomfortable with, you still have 2.5 hours to go practice and study and see if you kind of still get that concept. And if you don't, that's okay. Hopefully it won't be the one that's actually on your test. It's been a thrill being your online kind of teacher to help you out with this. Do me a favor. First thing, if you can, please subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. And I know you're not going to be watching these videos. Maybe you're going to study some econ in college. But that's going to hopefully, tell YouTube that my videos are helpful and helping more people. But the big one, I want you to come back. In 4 hours from now, when you're done with the test, come back, leave a comment and say, this was helpful or not helpful, on this actual, or on Twitter or Instagram. Let me know how you did, and I'm gonna be looking out for you. In fact, it's like when you're in the AP test, I'm gonna be like biting my nails and like walking across my living room like I'm having a baby or something like that. I'm nervous for you, but I'm also super, super excited, and you should be excited as well. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for watching my videos and supporting my channel. And thank your teachers for this tough year. It's been really difficult. Teachers, if you need anything, you let me know. Thank you so much for watching these videos. To all of you, good luck. And for the last time, until next time.